The room was suffocating. The air hung heavy, thick with a silence that seemed to press down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I could barely see through the dim light, but I knew what I was looking at. Mama was gone. Her face, once so full of life and warmth, now looked so peaceful, as if she were just sleeping. But I knew she wasn't. The doctor had told us. A heart attack. Just like that, my world had shattered. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. All I could feel was this overwhelming, crushing pain. It was as if someone had taken a sledgehammer to my heart, and every beat was a reminder of what I had lost. My legs felt like jelly, and I collapsed onto the bed next to her. I didn't even notice Nick Adams, my friend, sitting there, trying to stay strong for me. He reached out, but I couldn't respond. I was numb, hollow inside. The door creaked open, and Red West stepped in. I hadn't even heard him come in. He looked just as broken as I felt. His eyes were red, and he was struggling to hold it together. He closed the door behind him and walked over to me. I saw him, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, stuck in this moment of unbearable pain. Then, without a word, he pulled me into a tight embrace. I felt his fingers digging into my back, and I knew he was hurting just as much as I was. "Mama's gone, Red. My mama's gone. What will I do? I've lost everything. She was everything. Without her, I got nothing. It's all over, man," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The words were like a knife, slicing through the silence. Red didn't say anything for a long moment. He just held me, and I clung to him, feeling the warmth of his body, the strength in his arms. It was the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. "I know, E. She was a fine woman, and now I've lost my daddy. He's gone too," he finally said, his voice breaking. I hadn't even realized that Red had lost his dad too. It was like the world had decided to deal us both the worst hand possible. We held each other, and for a moment it felt like the world had stopped spinning. The pain was still there, but in that embrace I felt a tiny bit of comfort, a tiny bit of strength. Outside the heat was oppressive, but I didn't care. I didn't care about anything anymore. 500 people were standing in the street, a silent vigil along what they now called Elvis Presley Boulevard. More than 2,000 fans had come from all over, some even from New York and Boston. They were staying with strangers, sleeping on couches, just to be close to me, to be close to Mama. It was a surreal scene, like something from a movie, but it was real. It was happening. The telegrams and phone calls started pouring in. Hollywood stars, heads of state, people I had never met, all sending their condolences. The bond between Mama and me was something everyone knew, something that had touched people in the most obscure places. But right now, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the empty space where Mama used to be, the hole in my heart that nothing could fill. The year had already been crazy. I had just signed a big movie deal, one that was supposed to be different, better than the others. But now it felt like it didn't matter. My earnings were about to drop from $125,000 a month to $78 a month, because I was going to be in the Army. The public was in an uproar, teenagers picketing recruiting depots, fans writing letters to the government trying to keep me safe. It was all madness, but it was nothing compared to the madness in my heart. I didn't know what was going to happen next. All I knew was that I was lost, and I needed to find my way back. But for now, I just held on to Red, and we faced the pain together. I remember the day when the wise men in Washington wanted to make sure Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, wouldn't get any special treatment in the Army. A nosy reporter made things worse by saying an Army source promised Elvis wouldn't have to get a standard haircut and would be put in the special services to entertain the troops. The source said this was what happened with Vic Damon and Eddie Fisher. But Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, saw through it. He knew these guys were giving away for free what they used to get paid a lot for. Elvis, always the smart one, told everyone, "All I want to do is to be treated like an ordinary G. I want to do my duty, and I'm mighty proud to be given the opportunity to serve my country." That calmed things down for a bit, but there was a bigger problem. Elvis got a notice to report to the induction center in Memphis, but he was in the middle of filming King Creole, and they had already spent almost $300,000. If Elvis went to the Army as planned, the movie would be scrapped. So Elvis, along with his manager and producer, wrote to the Pentagon asking for a 3-month deferment. Deferments were pretty common back then, but when the news got out, people in Washington were not happy. A guy named Nick Johnson even quit his job on the draft board, saying he couldn't ask Mountain Boys to serve if Elvis got special treatment. But in the end, Elvis got his deferment and finished the movie. Around this time, Red West, one of Elvis's closest friends, visited Graceland while on leave from the Marines. He noticed something was off with Elvis's mom, Gladys. She seemed different, like she knew something was wrong. She told Red to look after her boy, but it felt final. Red left the next day feeling sad and uneasy. Red met up with Elvis in Hollywood for the shooting of King Creole. Elvis showed him around the studio, and Red was blown away. They were going to New Orleans for more filming, and Elvis invited Red to come along. Red was excited, but he also felt a bit out of place in his Marine uniform. They traveled by train because Elvis had a fear of flying after a near crash a year earlier. On the train, Red got to hang out with Elvis, Colonel Tom, and other actors like Carolyn Jones and Aaron Spelling. It was a dream come true for him. In New Orleans, Red had a funny experience. He won some money playing blackjack with Elvis and Walter Matthau, but he lost it to a girl he met later. It was a lesson in life for him. Red stayed with Elvis for a week, and it made him want to be part of the entertainment world. On March 24, 1958, Elvis arrived at the Memphis Draft Board with his parents and Lamar Fike. The place was swarmed with reporters from all over. They asked Elvis all sorts of silly questions, and he just answered politely. Colonel Tom was there, handing out glossy photos of Elvis in King Creole. After the induction, Elvis became Private Presley and was sent to Fort Chaffee for basic training. The reporters followed him there, and when an army barber cut his famous hair, Elvis smiled. But Colonel Tom commented that the hair would be worth a lot to some people. At Fort Chaffee, Elvis tried to act like any other soldier, but he was still treated differently. He rented a house in Killeen, and brought his family and friends to stay with him. They had fun with music and parties, but it was different from the barracks. Elvis was already planning to take his family to Germany with him. In July, the Presley family noticed that Gladys was getting sick. Her face was pale, and she had trouble moving around. They decided to go back to Memphis to see a doctor. When they got there, the doctors said she had hepatitis. On August 11th, Vernon called Elvis to tell him Gladys was in serious condition. Despite his fear of flying, Elvis took the first flight to Memphis. When Elvis got to the hospital, he knew it was bad. He stayed by his mother's side for 36 hours. On the night of August 13th, Vernon called to say Gladys had passed away. Elvis was devastated. He cried for hours and was in shock. When he left the hospital, he could barely talk to the reporters. Back at Graceland, he wandered around, unable to believe what had happened. Red West heard about Gladys's death on the radio while he was in the Marines. He tried to get leave to pay his respects, but couldn't. Then he got news that his own father was critically ill. He finally got leave and flew to Atlanta, but by the time he got to Memphis, his father had already passed away. Red couldn't attend Gladys's funeral, but he went to Graceland to pay his respects to Elvis. The next day, he had to say goodbye to his father. Elvis came to the funeral parlor to support Red, even though he was still grieving for his own mother. It was a powerful moment, and Red never forgot how much Elvis cared. After the funeral, Elvis went back to Fort Hood. He tried to keep things normal, but it was hard. Red remembers that Elvis would often stay up late with his friends, singing and playing music. It was a way for him to cope with the loss. Elvis's grandmother, Minnie, became the new matriarch of the house, taking care of everyone. A week after Red got out of the Marines, Elvis invited him to Killeen. They spent many nights singing and having fun, but it was always clean and respectful. Elvis was trying to forget, but the memory of his mother always stayed with him. Red knew that if Gladys had lived, Elvis might have been a different person. Losing her at such a young age changed him in ways no one could fully understand. While the world saw Elvis as this amazing, talented guy, the one who believed in him the most was Elvis himself. He was really into the Bible, spiritual stuff, and even believed in life after death. He thought he had special powers to heal people just by touching them. He believed he would come back to life in another form, and that he had a special mission given to him by God. Elvis would talk for hours about these things with us, his friends. Red, Sonny, and Dave, who spent a lot of time with him, sometimes thought it was a bit weird, but they also couldn't deny that Elvis had a powerful effect on people. He could make crowds do whatever he wanted, almost like he had some kind of magical control over them. Elvis was really affected by his mom's death. He became obsessed with the idea that she might come back in another life. He would talk about how only strong people who showed their power on Earth would be reincarnated. He even started to do some really strange things, like visiting mortuaries and watching bodies being prepared for funerals. It was so strange that it scared us sometimes. One night, after watching a horror movie, Elvis decided to take us to the mortuary where his mom was laid out. It was around 3 in the morning, and we went in through the back door. The place was empty, and it was really dark and eerie. Elvis, being Elvis, just walked around like he owned the place. He found the embalming room and started talking about how bodies are prepared, lifting up sheets to show us the bodies. It was really creepy, but Linda, who was with us, seemed fascinated. Elvis had a similar fascination with birth. One time at 1 in the morning, he decided to go see a baby that Linda's sister had just given birth to. We went to the hospital, and the place went crazy. Nurses were running around, and people were asking for autographs. Elvis even tried to stop a woman who was in labor, and he said he could take away her pain. The doctors were flipping out, but the woman actually believed him and said the pain was gone. Elvis really believed he had the power to heal people. Red, who had a bad back, would tell me that whenever he complained about the pain, Elvis would make him sit down and lay his hands on him, saying the pain would go away. Red would play along, telling Elvis that the pain had disappeared just to make him feel good, but the pain never really went away. Elvis was a complex guy, and his beliefs and behaviors were sometimes hard to understand. But we, his friends, were always there for him, no matter what. We saw him as more than just a famous singer. We saw him as a special person with a unique vision of the world. It was one of those crazy holidays in Vail, and all the boys were out on the slopes, messing around at 3 o'clock in the morning. We were on these snowmobile things, and Dean, the son of Dr. Nick, was with us. He was a good kid who helped out the team a lot. We were having a blast on these disc sleds when Dean's sled skidded out of control, and he crashed into a fence, hurting his leg. We thought it was broken, because he was in so much pain. We carried him back to the chalet, and he was groaning. Then Elvis, who thought he was some kind of psychic healer, started laying his hands on Dean's leg. Poor Dean was nearly passing out, but Elvis was convinced he was fixing it. It turned out Dean's leg wasn't broken, just badly bruised. But if it had been broken, Elvis's messing around could have made it worse. When a doctor told Elvis it wasn't broken, he gave this satisfied smile and said, "I knew it, it's okay now." He was taking credit for the fact that it wasn't broken. One hot day at the Palm Springs house, it was over 100 degrees, and Elvis suddenly wanted to go shopping. When Elvis went, everyone went. We all crammed into the car, and it was so hot. Elvis started talking about metaphysics, and I'm not sure he knew what it really meant. There was this tiny cloud in the sky, and Elvis told us to stop the car. He said he was going to show us his powers by making the cloud move. We all looked at the cloud, sweating our butts off, and after about 10 minutes, the cloud dissipated a little. I saved the day by saying, "Gee, Elvis, you're right. Look, it's moving away." Elvis gave that sly smile, thinking he had done it again. Red, who had been with Elvis since the beginning, remembers a trip we took in a mobile home after making the movie Wild in the Country. We were driving back from Arizona, and Elvis was talking about his destiny to do something big beyond show business. He wanted to show us his powers and pointed out a cloud formation that looked like his head and Joseph Stalin's. I know it sounds crazy, but I saw it clearly. I didn't know if it was my mind playing tricks on me, but it was definitely there. I just went along with it, because I didn't want to rain on his parade. Elvis would often write letters to Red, full of advice and psychic philosophies. He would call us his disciples, and wanted to be the dominant figure. He even had a Mike Stone incident where I thought he was trying to control my mind to do something crazy. Elvis believed he could transfer pain to his fingers and heal people with his hands. He would also claim his powers could move bushes and leaves. I'd try to do it, but nothing would happen, and Elvis would just smile and say, "I can do it, and so can you, but you have to learn." Elvis knew the Bible really well, and would sit with his legs crossed, reading to us for hours. He'd mix Bible teachings with philosophy, and sometimes stop in the middle of a Bible reading to change the words. He once said, "The Bible says a rich man's chance of getting into heaven is like a camel's ass trying to get through the eye of a needle." We'd nod and agree, even though it was funny. He'd also give us the Sermon on the Mount, but with his own twist, calling us motherfuckers, and saying funny things about Jesus. We'd laugh about it later, but we never dared laugh in the moment. Elvis was fascinated by smart people, and would build on stories he heard. One night, someone told him that the song, Softly, was written by a dying man, and Elvis made up this whole story about it. He'd tell it on stage, and the audience would eat it up. We even started to believe it, but it was just his imagination. Elvis believed in life on other planets and flying saucers. One night in his mansion in Bel Air, he saw light through the trees, and was convinced it was a flying saucer. We all got excited and ran around looking for it, but it disappeared. Elvis was convinced it had landed somewhere, and we kept calling out to him. Finally, we found him in a driveway, looking off toward Westwood. I was half serious when I said, "Jesus, that light thing scared the hell out of me. I thought they had got you." It was a weird night, and I still don't know what we saw, but it was just another one of Elvis's many strange and unforgettable moments. I remember those days in Germany like they were yesterday. Elvis and I, along with Lamar, Vernon, and Grandma, all piled into this old hotel called the Grunwald. It was supposed to be a temporary home for us while Elvis was in the army, but it quickly turned into a comedy of errors. The place was full of old folks who looked like they were one step away from the grave. Grandma, bless her heart, was a real character. She'd never been out of Mississippi, and suddenly she was in Germany with a famous grandson. She had some rough days at first, especially with the vaccination shots. Her arms swelled up so bad, I thought she might not make it. But she was tough as nails and bounced back, taking over the house like it was her own. Living in the Grunwald was a bit of a nightmare. There was this old lady right below us, who would thump on the ceiling every time Lamar walked around. Lamar, being the joker he was, would jump up and down, yelling something about Hitler. It was hilarious, but it nearly drove Vernon crazy. He was always worried about bad publicity. Sure enough, we got kicked out of the hotel after one of our wild antics. Elvis and I were having a shaving cream fight, and I decided to light some paper on fire to smoke him out. It caused a small fire, and all the old folks thought they were going to get barbecued. Herr Schmidt, the manager, was furious. We were out of there in no time. So, we moved to a big, old house on Go the Stress. It was a lot more comfortable, but it came with its own set of problems. The landlady, Frau Gross, was a big, busty broad who didn't want to leave. She liked the idea of having men around, especially Vernon. She would talk to him in fast German, and he would just nod, not understanding a word. It was funny to watch. Grandma and Frau Gross would spend hours in the kitchen, with Grandma speaking in her thick Mississippi accent and Frau Gross in rapid German. It was a real sight. Grandma was a force to be reckoned with. One time, Frau Gross tried to take over the kitchen, and Grandma, without hesitation, hit her with a broom handle. It was chaos, but it was home. Elvis would wake up early and head to the base, where he was a scout. Most of the time he fit in well, but sometimes he'd get in a bad mood, especially when a superior officer hassled him. He'd mutter about the colonel and how he could have gotten him out of the army, but Elvis was a trooper. Red and I, along with Lamar, spent our days having all sorts of fun. We had water pistol fights in the hallways, pillow fights in the living room, and shaving cream battles. We'd be wrestling on the floor, and I'd wonder how long the old lady below us would last. Those were the days. I'd also sneak sometime with the chambermaids, but that was my little secret. When we weren't causing chaos, we'd hang out at the Beck's Beer Bar around the corner. I was there more than Lamar, but I didn't have much money. We were on Elvis's payroll, which meant we got our basic needs but no extra cash. I'd nurse a couple of beers all night, and sometimes I'd get into fights. I was young and stupid, I guess. Elvis wouldn't go into bars, but he didn't seem to mind our shenanigans. Meanwhile, Colonel Tom Parker was keeping Elvis's career alive. He had RCA Victor release old albums and repackage them to keep the fans happy. News stories about Elvis in the Army were making him look like a good, clean-cut American boy. By the time he came back, he was a different kind of star, one that appealed to everyone. Those 2 years in Germany were a mix of trouble, fun, and family. We were a tight-knit group, and no matter what, we had each other's backs. Even with all the crazy stuff that happened, it was a time I'll never forget. I remember a time when Elvis and I would go out and have fireworks fights with the German kids. Once, Elvis accidentally shot a Roman candle into the back of a German guy. The guy said it put a hole in his jacket and almost through his back. When Elvis offered to pay for a new jacket, the guy didn't make a fuss. It made Elvis happy because he thought if that happened in the States, the guy would have sued him for a lot of money. Elvis liked the Germans for that. Elvis was also getting along well with the German girls. One time, I saw a pretty girl by our front gate. I just said Elvis and pointed to his bedroom. I snuck her past Frau Gross, who didn't like other women around, and left her in Elvis's room. When Elvis came home, I told him I had a present for him. He had a big smile after that. There was one girl who took Elvis home to meet her mom. He slept over with her mom's permission. It surprised Elvis because that wouldn't have happened back home. The Germans were very open-minded. Elvis and I would hang out with the German guys in the park and play rough. We'd wrestle and throw each other around, but it was all in fun. One time Lamar was supposed to help us, but he slipped on some ice and slid down the hill like a human sled. It was hilarious and we all laughed, even though Lamar didn't find it funny. We played football games too. Sometimes the games would get interrupted by sheep crossing the field, and we'd end up playing in sheep poop. It was a bit gross but part of the fun. At night, we'd have Southern-style gatherings. Charlie Hodge, Rex Mansfield, Lamar, and Vern would come over. We'd sing, harmonize, and Minnie Presley would cook Southern food. It felt like a big family. Elvis got a lot of mail from fans, and he answered every letter. Sometimes he'd get letters just addressed to Elvis, Germany. He was a good soldier and took his job seriously. He once went on alert near the East German border and was ready to fight if needed. One time, an MP gave Elvis a hard time about mud on his license plate. Elvis was upset about it. I found the MP and brought him to Elvis. The MP ended up cleaning the license plate himself to make it right. Elvis was a magnet for girls, but he was careful with them. At a carnival, we had to run from a group of girls who recognized him. Lamar couldn't make it to the car and crashed into a fence. He was pretty mad about it, but it was funny. Vernon, Elvis's dad, met a lady named Dee Stanley. They got close, and later on, Vernon and Dee got married. It bothered Elvis a lot because he missed his mom, and the thought of his dad marrying again was hard for him to accept. In Germany, Elvis got into karate and practiced a lot with Rex. He also started taking Dexedrine pills to stay awake during long shifts. He really liked how the pills made him feel and started taking them regularly. This would later become a bigger problem. By 1975, Elvis was using a lot of different pills. He took them to sleep to wake up and for pain. His body was heavily dependent on them. His friends, like me, Sonny, and Dave, were worried about him. His system was messed up and he was destroying his health. Despite all this, Elvis didn't seem to care. He was a complex person, and it was hard to predict what he would do next. He was a mix of contradictions, and it was clear he was on a dangerous path. Red West and Sonny West were never just Elvis's bodyguards. They were his friends, or so I thought. But as the years went by, I saw how the pills changed Elvis, and it made me realize that we were all in this mess together. From the early days, the pills were a part of our lives. It started with uppers, like Dexamil and Dexedrine, which helped us stay awake and energetic. Elvis would give us these pills to keep up with his crazy schedule. We'd be on set all night, and then have to wake up at 6 in the morning for an early call. We'd drink coffee all day, and take more pills to stay awake. It was a vicious cycle, but we thought it was just part of the job. As the years went on, the pills got stronger. We moved from mild uppers to stronger stuff like Disbutol and Escatrol. Elvis would give us tranquilizers like Valium to help us sleep, but sometimes we just hide the pills or take them when we really needed them. It was a weird balancing act, and we all knew it wasn't healthy, but we were too deep in to stop. One of the craziest things that happened was when we were driving to Las Vegas in the early 1960s. We were all excited, but halfway there, Elvis realized he had left his kit bag with his pills back at the hotel in Los Angeles. He got so angry that he made us turn around and drive all the way back. He was like a child who didn't get his way. When we finally got back to the hotel, he gave us uppers, and we drove to Vegas again. We barely slept the whole weekend, and by the time we got back, we were all exhausted. The pills also changed Elvis's behavior. Sometimes he would go on wild spending sprees, buying anything and everything. Other times he would get violent and unpredictable. One night in 1973, during a show in Las Vegas, Elvis lost his voice. We called in Dr. Boyer, who helped clear his throat, and Elvis was able to finish the show. But later that night, Elvis got really mad at me. I had just taken a sleeping pill, and he wanted to see Dr. Boyer again. He was so irritated that he grabbed an M16 and pointed it at me. I was furious and told him to go ahead and shoot. Sonny tried to calm everyone down, and Elvis just winked at Sonny like it was all a joke. It was scary how quickly his moods could change. Another time, Elvis was showing some women his karate moves in his hotel suite. He accidentally broke a woman's ankle, but he didn't even check on her. She had to get surgery, and her husband found out and wanted to talk to Elvis. I had to handle the situation, and it was a mess. The pills were a big part of Elvis's life, and they affected everyone around him. By the mid-1970s, things had gotten out of control. We all knew it, but we didn't know how to stop it. We were all in too deep, and the pills had taken over. I remember it like it was yesterday. Red was there, trying to explain something to Presley, who was getting agitated. I could see the tension building. Presley reached for his .22 Savage revolver, and Red went pale. I saw the fear in Red's eyes. He was about to jump off the stool and deck Elvis. Elvis was ready to pull the gun, but something in Red's eyes made him stop. He knew Red was ready to fight, and that must have given him pause. Red stayed put. He told Elvis, "The husband of the girl whose ankle you broke in a karate demonstration is looking for you. We've been trying to keep him away." Elvis yelled, "Where is the motherfucker? Bring him up here." His dad, Vernon, tried to calm him down, but Elvis was too wired. The room was tense, and Jerry Schilling tried to talk to him, but Elvis just told him to get lost. Jerry walked out, and the room got even more tense. Later, things calmed down, and Elvis faced the girl whose ankle he'd broken. He paid her hospital bills and even invited her and her husband to see his show and stay at the hotel. It was a messy situation, but he tried to make it right, but the pills kept getting to him. In August 1975, he canceled his Las Vegas shows after just 2 appearances. Joe Esposito called me and said Elvis was in an ambulance. They said it was exhaustion or pneumonia, but I knew it was the pills. I'd seen it before. His breathing was messed up, and it was scary. Red and I were in Vegas, waiting for Elvis, Red, and Charlie Hodge to arrive on a private plane. Elvis had bought the plane just a few days before. On the flight, he took some pills and got really hyper. He couldn't breathe and demanded an oxygen mask. Red and Charlie got him to lie down on the floor and put his face over an air vent. It helped, but it was still scary. They had to make an emergency landing in Dallas, and they stayed at a motel for a few hours while the pilot changed planes. The pills had worn off, and Elvis was okay. I've seen Elvis on Demerol, nodding off and looking like a completely different person. On one of those nights, someone suggested taking a photo of him so he could see how he looked. It was a wake-up call, but I don't think it really changed much. Dr. Nick, our trusted doctor, often replaced Elvis's pills with vitamins to keep him from overdosing. But Dr. Boyer and Dr. Gainham, who treated his throat problems, probably didn't know about his pill habit. Red, Sonny, and Dave have all seen Elvis in a stupor from his pill taking. Sometimes he would forget the lyrics to songs or the sequence of the show. Other times he would ramble to the audience, and it wasn't the Elvis magic people came to see. Elvis was a different person when he was straight. He was a born performer, and there was no one like him. But the pills were changing him, and it was hard to watch. We all knew about his habit with uppers, downers, and tranquilizers. Even some undercover narc cops in Denver noticed. They kept a close eye on him, and when they saw his highs and lows, they knew something was up. They talked to Elvis about going into a sanitarium, but he refused. He said he could handle it himself, but we all knew he needed help. One night, I decided to talk to Elvis about how the pills were changing him. He was calm and he agreed with me. I thought it was a breakthrough, but the next morning he was angry. He said he didn't want people in his personal life and that he would do what he wanted. I gave up on trying to help him after that. In Las Vegas, rumors about Elvis were everywhere. Some were true, some weren't, but we did our best to keep them to a minimum. There was a time when a massage therapist named Big Bill was spreading rumors about Elvis's drug use. I had to shut him up. I called him and told him to stop talking or else. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but I had to protect Elvis. In the end, we all loved Elvis, even when he was acting like a child. We just wanted to see him straight and happy, the way he used to be. But sometimes, no matter how much you love someone, you can't change them.